All right. Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Kiddushin Daf Ayin Daled, and we're starting about 12 lines from the bottom of Ayin Gimel Amud Beis at the words Tanu Rabbanon. We had been discussing people who are trusted out of the gates. And here are some more examples. Tanu Rabbanon, the rabbis have taught us, Ne'emenes Chaya, a midwife is believed, Lomar Zeh Kohen, that this child that I just delivered is a Kohen, V'zeh Levi, V'zeh Nosin, V'zeh Mamzer, we trust her. However, when is this true? B'medvar Mamurim, Shelo Kara Alei Shem Iror, when there's no negative claim against the child. Aval Kara Alei Iror Eina Ne'emenes. So then the Gemara says that we only trust her when there's no claim against her. So we trust her, but we trust her in limited scope. The Gemara then says, what? We actually don't trust her. We trust her when there's nothing competing. When there's nothing competing, when the scenario is pristine, then we trust her. It's not that we don't trust her. We trust her when the scenario, like a regular birth, would be a scenario that we would trust her, right?
But the point is, she doesn't have Ne'emanus greater than anybody else, if there's a question.
It's not because of her gender. It might have been the same thing with a man, too. But it's an iror against a... But it's not a din in not trusting her. It's that when there's a competitive taina against that scenario, then we don't trust her. Then we need two aided.
Or whatever.
She knows the family. She's the doula. She's the midwife.
I understand, but she may be there thirdly.
You're asking good, but we do trust her because there's rov be'ilo sachar abal. We have halachic assumptions to assume that the husband is the father. So when she sees the couple in the room, the husband sitting in the room, encouraging his wife. So then, the baby's a Kohen. We trust her as long as there's no iror. Because remember, the husband's relationship to his child is a chazaka. It's not a vados. So that when the chazaka is in place, no problem. When there's an iror on the chazaka, then it's a problem. So it says the Gemara, iror demai. What is the iror over here? What is it that we're concerned about? The Gemara says, ilema ir chad. If you want to say that the chaya is not ne'emenes when one person goes up against her, that can't be. V'ha'amar Rabbi Yochanan, that one person's claim is not even valuable. Ein iror pachos mishnayim. So now we've just qualified our machlokas more. If there's one person who says about the midwife, I disagree with you, we ignore that person because we need two people to have a valid opinion. So to take Tex's question, we trust her even against one. That's dumb. One person is irrelevant. If she says this baby's a Kohen, the baby's a Kohen. There's one person complaining, she wins over that person because an iror requires two. So it says the Gemara, Ella, it must be ir trey. It must be that when the Brisa says that we only trust a chaya, when there's no iror, it must be that when there is an iror, that there must be two people, and that's answer number one. And says the Gemara, V'iba Isema, 7 lines from the bottom, perhaps we can say, Le'olam emalach ir erchad. Perhaps we can say that the chaya is also not trusted, even when the pushback against her is from one person. And when is it that we employ the rule that a complaint, that a taina to break a chazaka has to be at least two people? Says the Gemara, that's true when we have a chazaka of kashrus. When there's a chazaka of kashrus, so then says the Gemara, then we need two. Then we need two people to ruin the chazaka. Aval hecha deleka chazaka de kashrus chad nami behemet. So now we have a little bit more of a complex formula. When the family is pristine and in wonderful shape, white picket fence, then when the chaya, when the midwife says that this baby's a Kohen, we trust her outright. When the family is not perfect, and even if there's only one aid, that combo is stronger than the opinion of the chaya. And that is the second approach here. We are 3 lines from the bottom of Ayin Gimel Amud Beis. We're going to move on to other similar types of cases where we have ne'emanus. Ne'eman bal mekach lomar lozeh macharti v'lozeh ein macharti. If I'm a store owner, I'm selling a product. So I can say I sold it to you, but I didn't sell it to you. That person is trusted. However, the Gemara qualifies this. When is it true that we trust the mocher, the seller, to say I sold to person A and not to person B? I made a purchase, so you made a purchase for me, but I'm still holding the product. So if I'm still holding the product and I'm not sure if I sold to Chaim or to Ruvain, I am the posek achron. I can say who I'm supposed to give it to. Aval ein mekcho biyado, but if I no longer have the mekach in hand, if I no longer have the product that I sold in hand, ein or ne'eman, then the din is that person is that the mocher is no longer trusted. Asks the Gemara, why? Turn to the top of Ayin Daled Amud Aleph. V'nechze zuze miman nakat. Go see who's lacking money. Go look at forensic accounting. Where was there a reduction from the bank account for the item that cost $47.20? Just go look. Go look on the credit card statement. Who spent money? Lo tzricha de nakad mitar vayhu. Hitaka took money. The mocher took money from both people. This just happened to me this past week. I'm getting to the end of my lease. So the guy said to me, yeah, the car is yours. He calls me back 20 minutes later. I was on the way to go get the bag to make sure that the car was yours, and somebody else got the right. Mamish, this case, two people had given money. I gave him my down payment for the car. Another guy at the same parallel time gave a down payment for the same exact car, of which there was only one left on the lot. And I lost the car. But in that one moment, the mocher had money from both of us. And where was the car? It was biyad the mocher. Then we believe him. But once the car has been delivered to one person, then the mocher's opinion no longer matters anymore. So here the money was mitar vayu. The Amar, in which is a little bit more of a nuance to Kimta here on the second line, the Amar, chad mi daitoi, v'chad bal korcho. One person gave the money to the mocher because the mocher wanted to sell it. The other guy forced his money in. That's the ukimta that we're dealing with. The lo yediyah, the mocher doesn't know, hai mi daito, v'hai lo mi daito. He doesn't remember who is who. Okay, that's why we can't look at who the money, at who spent money, because we're dealing with a case where both people spent money. Next case, 3 lines down, and Ayin Daled Amud Aleph Ne'eman Dayan Lomar Lazeh Zochisi v'Lazeh Chiyavti. I would hope that the Dayan would remember, if he can remember every Shach and Taz in Yoreh Day, he should remember how he paskined in a particular case. So we believe the Dayan to say that he was, one guy was acquitted and the other guy was held accountable. That's still true. That's only true, I should say, if everybody, both the plaintiff and the defendant, are standing right there. The din is that if they're not in front of him anymore, this is an unbelievable thing. We don't believe the Dayan. Once they've left the Beis Din and it's unclear as to what the psak was like, we don't trust the Dayan anymore. He has no ne'emanos to say who won and who lost. Says the Gemara, why? The nechzei chusa man nakid. Just go look. There was something, some call to action took place after the Dayan. If it was a machlokes about money, who has the money? If there was a shtar that was written as to who the victor was, go look at the shtar. So says the Gemara, lo tzricha dekriya zechusaihu. Whatever the document was that indicated who won, plaintiff or defendant, that document was torn up. Okay, v'nei hader v'nei daininhu. What's the big deal? If you have a shaila and you go through the halachic process, the answer is going to be the same. Right? It should be. If you bring a choshen mishpat shaila to the Beis Din, the same shaila, you ask it twice, you should get the same answer. Says the Gemara, Bishuda the Daini. We're talking about a case where we were only relying on the judgment of the seichel of the Dayan, but not on a shach or on a taz or on the Shulchan Aruch or on the Mishnah Brura. This was a case that is extra legal. It's outside of the framework of halacha, as it were. They'll say a new shaila. There are no mari makomos for this. We have a lot of these now with AI, with technology. Shailas come up all the time nowadays. My gosh, there's so many examples. When you walk down the block, you're getting recorded by every Ring doorbell. There's so many new shilas that come up. So until they're codified, it's Shuda D'Daini. So this was a case that was Shuda D'Daini, where we needed to rely on the judgment of the Dayan without there being a specific Mari Makom to support his Shita. So that's not fair to redo the case. And therefore, we only trust the Dayan when the plaintiff and defendant are in front of him, but not when they're not in front of him. Amar Rav Nachman, Shlosha ne'emonin al ha-bechor. 3 people are trusted to say that a child is a bechor. Eluhain, Chaya, the midwife, Aviv, V'imo, the mother and the father. Chaya le'alter. The midwife only for as long as she's standing there delivering the child. Once she's no longer standing there, we saw machlokes about this yesterday, is it leaving the room or turning around? So that, the Chaya, we trust her for a very limited amount of time. Imo kol shiva. A mother, we trust her for 7 days, because during those 7 days, the child basically never leaves her side. And because of that, she is for sure going to be Ne'eman. And Aviv le'olam. It's fascinating. We trust the father forever to say that a child is a bechor. It's interesting that we don't say that by the mother, but we do say that by the father, because the mother is the vadai mother, and the father is a chazaka in the relationship, as we've already discussed.
Is there anything else we would say?
This is difficult, but the Gemara explains how we got to this conclusion. Kiddutanya, it's a pasuk, Yakir. And the Gemara says, Yakirenu le'acherim. The father is trusted not because of any logic that we can insert, but because the Torah asserted the logic, which is not even a logic, just a din d'oraisa, that we trust the father to say that a child is a bechor. Mikan, says the Gemara, Mikan Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Ne'eman Adam Lomar Ze b'ni bechori, Uchashem she'ne'eman Lomar Ze b'ni bechori. Just like this pasuk of Yakir teaches us that a father is trusted to say that his child is a bechor, Kach ne'eman Lomar Ze ben gerusha v'ze ben chalutza. We also trust him to say that a child is a ben gerusha or ben chalutza. And I think you jumped too far. The fact that a father can make an established decision about a child being a bechor or not is based on the pasuk of Yakir. How did you get to ben gerusha, ben chalutza? That's a big jump, and the Gemara does not want to hear about it. That's why the Chachamim argue it. Okay, that brings us to the two dots, a third of the way down. Abashal hayakori l'shtuki b'duki. If you'll recall, we spoke about a shtuki and an asufi. A shtuki is a person where we know the mother but not the father, because every time the child says, "Oh, is that my Abba?" the mother goes, "Shh, shtuki." She tells the kid to be quiet. Thus, the name shtuki. And we saw in a Mishnah earlier that Abba Shaul had another name for a shtuki, which was beduki. Now, yes, the case of asufi is even worse, where there's no parents. It's like it's safe haven rules. It's like just dropping a kid at a hospital. Yeah, it's crazy town, which happens fairly often. For our standards, shockingly often. And maybe there are times that it's better for the baby that way, but it's still sad. You're correct. So the Gemara wants to know, why did Abba Shaul have to give another title for this person? We were fine with shtuki; it was sad enough that way. Now you're going to say beduki, that he had to be checked. What does this even mean? Says the Gemara, my beduki. Why is it? First of all, what does beduki mean? But more broadly, is what was Abba Shaul trying to communicate by adding another name? Ilema, if you want to say shabodkenes imo, that we have to check the status of the mother. Ve'omeres lekasher nivalti ne'emenes, to say that she would say that I conceived from a man who was a kasher. If that's what you want to say, and keman keraban Gamliel, and you want to say that that's like the sheet of Rabban Gamliel, so then our Mishnah shouldn't have to go out of its way to label this child a beduki by checking the mother as to who she conceived from, because after all, Tanina Chada Zimna, we already have a Mari Makom, one that we have seen in Maseches Ksubas a few times. Ditznan. Hayasa me'uberes, a woman was pregnant, ve'amru la, and they said to her, ma tivo shal ubarzeh, what is the status of this child? And amra lahem me'ish ploni v'kohenu, she is allowed to then say that this child is a kasher. Rabban Gamliel, Rabbi Lazar, Omrim, ne'emenes, we trust her, which is exactly what we thought the word beduki was. So it can't be that beduki is coming to teach us a din that was already taught in a brisa, in a Mishnah, in Maseches Ksubis. Let's finish out the brisa. Rabbi Yeshua Omer, Lomi Pia Anuchayin, we don't believe her. From Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Halacha Rabban Gamliel. So because Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel already paskin like Rabban Gamliel for the Mishnah in Maseches Ksubis, so therefore it makes no sense that Abba Shaul would double down on a very clear halacha. If it's so clear from Maseches Ksubis that we paskin like Rabban Gamliel that she's ne'emenes, why did Abba Shaul rename the shtuki a beduki to teach the same exact halacha that we already knew that she's ne'emenes? Says the Gemara, because we need to have more nuance. Chada lahachshir ba, v'chada lahachshir bebita. We need to make a distinction. We first have to make sure that the mother has a status of kosher, and we then have to make sure, let me say better. We first have to make sure that the mother conceived from a man who is kosher, and second, we then have to establish that the daughter is kosher. So that's why we have two Mari Makomos. We have the Mishnah in Maseches Ksubis, and we have the Mishnah right here, where Abba Shaul renamed the shtuki a beduki to teach us two dinim, one that the mother we trust, and the second that the daughter we also assume is kosher. So says the Gemara halfway down on Ayin Dal Amar Aleph, Hanicha, I understand that you might need two Mari Makomos to teach one for the mother, one for the daughter, where Liman de Amar, where we hold the Divrei HaMachshir Ba Posel Bebita, where the halacha is that by a mother, she might well be kosher, but her daughter might well be puzzle. That's why we need two Mari Makomos in this case to teach us that even here the daughter is kosher. Elo Liman de Amar that Divrei HaMachshir Ba Machshir Bebita, but according to the Shita that says by definition, once we understand that the mother is a kosher, then we don't need to do any more research, because we then therefore automatically assume that the daughter is a kosher. So then we don't need Tumar Mekomos. We don't need both Abba Shaul teaching us that a shtuki is a beduki, and also the Mishnah from Maseches Ksubis. So Abba Shaul, my asala ashmuinan. What then is Abba Shaul coming to teach? According to the Shita, that the daughter immediately, automatically follows whatever the status of the mother is. And once the mother is proven, or she's ne'emenes to say that she conceived from someone who was a kosher, the whole story is over, even about the bas. What's Abba Shaul adding? So says the Gemara, da Abba Shaul adifa midu Rabban Gamliel. The sheet of Abba Shaul goes even further than Rabban Gamliel. Let's see why. We're 2/3 of the way down on Ayin Dal and Madal. The Gemara says, the Ime Hasam, if I would have only had the shita of Rabban Gamliel that a woman is ne'emenes, well, havamina that she might have only been ne'emenes in a particular case, that hasam to rov ksherin etzla. Perhaps it's only true where most of the people that she's exposed to are ksherim. Aval hecha de rov psulin etzla. But maybe if she's exposed to a community where most of the people available to her are not ksherim, they're psulin, then perhaps we would say she's not ne'emenes. Kamash malan tzricha. Therefore, the Gemara says that's why Abba Shaul is a starker shita. Rabban Gamliel is the baseline. We trust her in a regular case scenario where rov of the men around her are ksherim. What Abba Shaul is adding is that we even trust her when rov of the men around her are not ne'emenes, and that already is a big chiddush. Amar Rava halacha ka'Abba Shaul. It's taka true. We trust this woman to say, I conceal from someone, even if rov of the people around her are not ne'emenes. Rov of the people around her are not ksherim, they're psulim. So let's bring this halacha l'maisa just for a moment. Let's say I've dealt with this before with women who've conceived from sperm banks, from sperm donors. What's the status of your child? Kohen? Maybe. There's no tash mishamita. Sperm banks are weird places. So what do we do? So if she says, I ensured that the zera is, I'm playing this out because I'm not opposing, but if she ensured that the zera was from someone who's a yid, first of all, that's complicated in one way, but easier in another, because at least now yichus, but does yichus happen without tash v'shamita? That's a diyun as well. Ben Sira, the mikvah. Okay. All right. Let's continue. We're at a new Mishnah now, and this Mishnah is similar to the previous Mishnah. The previous Mishnah that we had learned a couple of blot ago was discussing about people getting married who are mamzerim, who's allowed to get married and who's not allowed to get married. And that's why this Mishnah sounds duplicative. The Mishnah writes 3/4 of the way down on Ayin Daled Amud Aleph, Kol ha'asurim lavo b'kahal. Anyone who's asur to marry into the kahal, mutarim lavo zeh b'zeh. They're allowed to marry one another. So says the Gemara, that's the Tana Kama, Rabbi Yehuda Oser. This is cryptic a little bit because this broad category of asur and lavo b'kahal, we have to see what that means. The Gemara is going to ask on this. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, vada'an bivada'an, when we have people who are asur and lavo b'kahal, if they're both vadai not able to marry into the kahal, mutter. If you have a man who's a vadai not able to marry into the kahal and a woman who's vadai not able to marry, that's easy. They can marry one another, no problem. If one person is a vadai and the other person is a suffix, or the reverse, v'sveikan bevadai, if the man is one and the woman is the other, or vice versa, or v'sveikan, in all three of these iterations, asur, because when we say that there's a suffix, what that means is that it might be that they're not allowed to marry into the kahal, but it might be that they are allowed to marry into the kahal. And because there's a chance that they might be able to marry to the kahal, they can't marry a vadai who's not allowed to marry to the kahal, because that might be asur. The eluhein hasvekos, who are the people who fall into the category of our Mishnah when we talk about a suffix, shtuki, asufi, vikusi. A shtuki, as we've discussed, is a child who knows his mother but not his father. And asufi is a child who knows neither his mother nor his father. And a kusi, as we've discussed throughout Shas, has different explanations in different parts of Shatz. Here we're talking about the conversions of the Kusi people when they converted out of fear of being killed by lions. So then we had a kashya on whether or not their gerus was considered valid. Okay, so now we have to analyze our Gemara, our Mishnah. My kol asur lavo bekal. Who was the Mishnah referring to when it said that they're asur lavo bekal? Ilema mamzire unesine shtuke ve'asufe. If you want to say that the beginning of our Mishnah, when it says that the people that we're talking about who are asur and lavo bekahal are talking about these four groups of mamzer, nasin, shtuki, and asufi, that can't be. Hatanale Reisha, the previous Mishnah already discussed it. What did the previous Mishnah say? Quote, mamzire, nasine, shtuki, ve'asufi, mutar lavo zebo. So we already learned that. That can't be what our Mishnah is talking about. Visu, and furthermore, what does it mean for Rabbi Yehuda Oser? Oh, haya. When Rabbi Yehuda says that something is Aser, who's he talking about? Ilema, if you want to say that Rabbi Yehuda was saying that it was Aser in the case of Vadan Bisveikan. If you want to say that Rabbi Yehuda was saying that that's Aser, well, Hamid Katani Seifa, the end of the Mishnah discussed that clearly of Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Vadan Bevadan Mutter, Vadan Bisveikan. Besveikan aser mechlad Rabbi Yehuda lo svirale. It implies Rabbi Yehuda would hold that it's mutter in regards to the case of Safek and Vadai getting married. So therefore, it can't be that our Mishnah is talking about a mamzer and a nasin. V'chitema, if you want to say Rabbi Yehuda oser ager b'mamzeres, that when our Mishnah says Rabbi Yehuda oser, he's talking about a different case, which is a case of a ger marrying a mamzeres, which we saw yesterday and the day before on this topic. Says the Gemara, midi ger b'mamzeres ktani. That's pashut, not what our Mishnah is talking about. So I'm going to review the question one more time outside, because the rest of today is 4 answers to this question. So we need to make sure we have the question clear so that the answers are potentially going to work. We're going to reject 3 of them, but the last one actually does work. We're bothered by the language of our Mishnah. The Mishnah that opens at the bottom of Ayin Daled says, Kol ha'asur and lavo bekal. Anyone who's not allowed to marry into the kal, they're allowed to marry each other. And the Gemara says that cannot be talking about mamzerim, nesinim, shtukim, and asu, because we already said that in a previous Mishnah. So who is the Mishnah referring to when it says that they're asur lavo bekal? That's the Gemara's question. Let's present answer number 1. Says the Gemara, I didn't even finish the question. Kol asur lavo bekal ktani. It can't be that we're talking about ger b'mamzeres because it says kol asur lavo bekal. So therefore, we need to figure out, what does our Mishnah mean when it says kol ha'asur lavo bekal? Omar Rav Yehuda. Let's figure out the machlokas Tanakam and Rav Yehuda. This Rav Yehuda who's answering this question is an Abora. It's not the Tana of our Mishnah, obviously. And the Gemara, as we turn to the top of Ayin Daled Amud Beis, gives its first answer. Before I do this first answer, just my schedule is a little chaotic today. We're going to learn 1 blot tonight. I'm going to record early tomorrow 1/2 of an amud. I'll do 1 amud, excuse me. And then on Shabbos at 2:50, we'll do a blot and a half. That's going to be our game plan. Okay. Hachi Kamar. Here's how we understand what it means, asur and lavo bekal. Kol asur and lavo bekal kehuna. Now we're talking about Kohanim. We're talking about those who are not allowed to marry Kohanim. My ninhu. Who is it that we are talking about? Who is the Mishnah discussing when it says that they're not allowed to marry into the kal of Kohanim? So says the Gemara, Giores pchusa mibas shalosh shanim v'yom echad. Maybe we're talking about a Giores who's younger than 3. What did our Mishnah say? Our Mishnah had said that anyone who is aser to be yavo bekal is mutarim lavo zebasin. So the Gemara says that these children who became a Giores before the age of 3, so then we assume that even when they're older, that they can get married. Udelo Reb Shimon ben Yochai, not like Reb Shimon ben Yochai, who held that they were still problematic to marry. They are mutarim lavo zebazeh. He held that there was no isser for them at all to get married, even if they were older than 3, they could still marry a Kohen. Says the Gemara, why don't we establish our Mishnah like Reb Shimon ben Yochai? We're on Ayin Daled Amud Beis, 4 lines down. Maybe perhaps, says the Gemara, why didn't we establish our Mishnah, the Machlokas Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda, like the sheet of Reb Shimon ben Yochai, that we're talking about a girl who converted even when she was older than 3, and therefore she's 3 years old. Why can't we do that? Says the Gemara, in Cain, mitzida tavra, great language. Then the side is broken, a little bit of a catchphrase. It means that then we have a big problem. There's a hole in the boat, kind of a thing. Why? I wonder if that's actually where it came from. Mitzida tavra? No. So says the Gemara, that doesn't work because says the Gemara, after all, the reason why we have a concern about the age is because that when she's under that age, she's allowed to marry a Kohen, but asura lavo zebozeh, but she's not allowed to marry a mamzeres. So what do we see from here? According to Reb Shimon ben Yochai, when a girl converts when she's less than 3 years old, she's muteres lavo bekal kahuna umuteres lavo zebazeh. That won't work in our Mishnah. Our Mishnah can't be Reb Shimon ben Yochai, because if this young girl had been under 3, she wouldn't only be allowed to marry a Kohen, she'd also be allowed to marry a mamzer. And that's for sure not true. That's not what our Mishnah says. So therefore, our Mishnah is not like Reb Shimon ben Yochai, and the Gemara has presented answer number 1. Answer number 1 is found on the top line of Ayin Daled Amud Beis, that the Machlokas Tanakam and Rabbi Yehuda is discussing Kol ha'asurim lavo bekal kahuna. We're talking about restrictions on marrying a Kohen, and not talking about mamzerim like the Havamin of the Gemara said. Says the Gemara, this does not work. V'klalahu, is it really a general rule about Kohanim? T'chol ha'asurim lavo bekal kahuna mutarim lavo zebazeh, that anyone who's usher to marry a Kohen are allowed to marry mamzerim. That's for sure not true. After all, a quarter of the way down on Ayin Daled Amud Beis v'harei almana ugrusha v'chalola v'zona, we have this group of women: a widow, a woman who's divorced, a chalala, a woman who's born to a relationship from a Kohen that should not have been, v'zona, a woman who has been promiscuous. They're asurim lavo bekal kahuna. They're not allowed to marry a Kohen. A woman who has slept with someone is not allowed to marry a Kohen. Ve'asurim lavo zebazeh, and they're also usher to marry a mamzer. So therefore, the general rule that we try to extract from our Mishnah with answer number 1 does not work. V'su, and furthermore, hamuter, had it been that they were mutter to marry a Kohen, it would imply usher that they're not allowed to marry a mamzer, which also doesn't fit in our Mishnah. After all, says the Gemara, v'harei ger mutter bekohenes u mutter b'mamzeres. We see that a ger breaks this concern. We see that a ger is allowed to marry a Kohen, and a ger is also allowed to marry a mamzeres. We saw this as Shitas Rava the other day, that he allowed. Remember, we were discussing who can talk to the gerim, because it's very difficult to say that they're not part of the kal. So that's what Rava taught at that time, and that halacha is being repeated over here. And therefore, answer number 1 is no longer valid. So now we're back to square one. We have to figure out what's the machlokas between the Tanakam and Rabbi Yehuda and our Mishnah. And the Gemara says a third of the way down with answer number 2. Ela Amar Rav Nasan bar Hoshaya. Hachi Kamar. Kol shekohen aser lisa es bito. We're talking about a case scenario where a Kohen is not allowed to marry a person's daughter. So person X, let's say he's a man. If a Kohen is not allowed to marry her daughter, that is the machlokas between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda. Umaynihu. What type of person are we talking about? Let's say that I have a friend who's a ger, shenasa giores. So 2 people, they became gerim, and they married after they became gerim, and they had a child. Uche Rebbe Lazar ben Yaakov. He holds mutarim lavo zebazeh. That's going to be the Tanakama, and Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah would be oser. So perhaps that's the case that we're dealing with in our Mishnah. The Gemara says this also doesn't work, because uklalahu, is this really a general rule? To kol she kohen aser lisa es bito mutarim lavo zebazeh. Is it true that anyone whose daughter can't marry a kohen, that under those circumstances, she would be able to marry a mamzer? After all, harei chalal, we have a case of a chalal shenasa bas Yisrael, to kohen aser lisa bito. A kohen's not allowed to marry the daughter of that relationship of the chalal. But ve'asurinami lavo zebazeh. So your general rule doesn't play out. Says the Gemara, that's not a good argument, because lo kasha, halfway down, karav dustai ben Rabbi Yehuda. This is a shita that we saw a couple of times already, and we'll probably see a couple more times, that a bas chalal is allowed to marry a Kohen. We saw this many blot ago. It says over here, Samach Dalet, about 10, 12 blot ago. It says the Gemara, wait 1 second, b'harei chalal, shenasa chalala. We have a case of a chalal who married a chalala, the Kohen, aser lisa bito. A Kohen's not allowed to marry them. V'aser nami lavo zebazeh. They're also aser to marry a mamzer, so they're doubly restricted. They also don't fit the profile of our Mishnah. V'su, and furthermore, hamuter aser. If you're going to say they're mutter to marry the Kohen, they'd still be usher to marry a mamzer. And then says the Gemara, just as the final press against answer number 2, so that we rejected, if you have a ger, he just converted and he married a regular Jew, the Kohen, mutter li sabito, they are allowed to marry the daughter, mutar levozeh bozeh. So it can't be that there's a machlokas between the various shitas of the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda. That doesn't work. Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda cannot be arguing about this. So the Gemara then presents its third answer. Ela Amar Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman was of the opinion, Rav Nachman Amar Rabba bar Avua, Hacha, we're talking about mamzer me achoso, mamzer me eshes ish ika beinahu. There's a machlokas about the status of the child born to a brother and sister who have had children together. Says the Gemara, Tanakama Savar, we're 2/3 of the way down, a little bit more. The Tanakama was of the opinion, Afilu mamzer me'achoso nami havi mamzer. It's a shtickle chiddush because you're not chayiv misa for that tash mishamita, you're chayiv kares. Says the Gemara that afilu mamzer me'achoso, that child is still going to be considered a mamzer. Brother and a sister have a child, the child's a mamzer. Rabbi Yehuda Savar, no. Me'eshes ish have mamzer, me'achoso lo have mamzer. And that's the machlokas between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda. So perhaps that is what our Mishnah is talking about on Ayin Dalet Amud Aleph. The Mishnah we started at the bottom of the page. Says the Gemara, well, no, because my kamashmal, and why would we need that source? After all, Tanina, we already have a Mishnah. Ezehu mamzer, kol shehi below yavo, divi Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was of the opinion that a child will be a mamzer, even if there's just an isser lav in the intimacy between the man and the woman, even if there's no kares, even if there's no capital punishments. He was very makbid that any baby born and from an usser relationship, if there's an isser lav, the child is a mamzer. So says the Gemara, that's the shita of Rabbi Akiva. Shimon Atemani Omer Kol Shechayav and Alav Kares Bidei Shamayim. He says the threshold to become a mamzer is higher. Only if it were to be the case that a man and a woman were intimate and that she got pregnant, if that relationship, that intimacy is chayiv kares, then only then would the child be a mamzer. The halacha kidvar, we paskin like him. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yoshua Amar Kol Shechayav and Alav Misas Bezdin. So what we see over here in this brisa is the same machlokas between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda, according to answer number 3. And therefore, answer number 3 is not valid. You can't tell me that the machlokas that we had from the brisa of Ezu Mamzer is the same machlokas that we have over here with our Mishnah on Ayin Dalet Amud Aleph. We don't do that in Shas. We're very careful about how many times we quote things. We're not going to have the same exact machlokas quoted twice. So therefore, the Gemara goes to its fourth and final answer, and we'll be ending with this answer 5 lines from the bottom of the page. Ella, says the Gemara, 12 lines from the bottom, Ella Amar Rava. We're talking about a ger, Ammoni uMoabi, a double knock. He's from the nation of Ammon and Moab, who's already restricted from marrying into the Jewish people, and then he became a ger. So says the Gemara as follows. When our Mishnah says, Kol ha'asurim lavo b'kahal umaynihu, what were we talking about? That's ger Ammoni uMoabi, mutarim lavo zebazeh. That if you have a ger from the nations of Ammon and Moab, and male and female, they can marry one another. Says the Gemara, okay, I hear you. That explains the Tanakama. But why would Rabbi Yehuda say usher in such a case? Ihachi, if that's true, that they should be able to get married. Ihachi, my Rabbi Yehuda oser. So says the Gemara, Afal pish Rabbi Yehuda oser ger b'mamzeres. Even though Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah would hold that there would be an isser of a ger b'mamzeres, that a ger is not allowed to marry a mamzeres. Hani mili ger de ra'ui lavo bekal. That's true of a regular ger who's not coming from Ammon and Moab, a regular ger who can marry into the kal. Aval ger Ammoni Moabi de einui lavo bekal, but the halacha would be different by the world of a ger of Ammon and Moab. That the halachos are different. That he would say would be usher. So this fourth answer is acceptable. And I'll just summarize and then we'll stop. We had asked a question about our Mishnah on Kiddushin Ayin Dalet Amud Aleph toward the bottom of the page. What does the language in the Mishnah mean when it says Kol ha'asurim lavo b'kal mutarim lavo zebaseh? And what did Rabbi Yehuda mean when he said oser? So the Gemara concludes we're talking about a ger Ammon uMoab. The Tana Kama was of the opinion that they were mutarim zebazeh. Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion that they are not mutarim zebazeh. We'll stop right here. A recording for Ayin Hey Amud Aleph tomorrow, and on Shabbos we'll do Ayin Hey Amud Beis and Ayin Vav together at 2:50 right after the 2:30 mincha. Wishing you all a beautiful night.